Do you ever feel like you're constantly overwhelmed with just the sheer amount of stuff you have to get done? And that no matter how much multitasking you do or how many hours there are in the day, it just seems like you're making no progress, you're not getting anywhere with it? Well, you're not alone. Many professionals struggle with this, and I did too. But what if I told you that there was a better way? Or ways, actually. Ways that I have personally used to completely revolutionize and transform my work life. Well, if you're intrigued, then let's get into it. So, the first professional management skill that we're going to deep dive into today is time management. And as Peter Drucker says, until we can manage time, we can manage nothing else. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. Because time management is a lot like a foundation for all the other skills. It would be the load-bearing pillar if you think about it in terms of the 6 pillars that we talked about in the first video. So it's the most important one because without it, it's not really possible to do any of the others. And without the time necessary to do things, it makes it where you just simply can't progress. So a helpful way to think about how this particular skill has a relationship with the other skills in terms of being a foundation for the rest is to think about it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This would be considered the most basic and foundational need of all your professional needs because without it, again, you're not able to progress to any of the other levels or you're not able to work on the other skills or pillars. Now that we have a better understanding of the importance of time management and how it relates to the other skills, let's talk about some ways that you can begin mastering the management of your own time. So the first thing that we'll cover is something that I learned from reading the book The One Thing by Gary Keller, and that is the importance of doing one single thing at a time. So I was fortunate in this regard because it was quite literally the very first book that I picked up as I began, I guess you would call it my transformation in my professional management journey. And it taught me a lot. In particular, it taught me that the simplest way to master anything is to simply do one thing at a time. And where we're on the topic of doing one thing at a time, perhaps you've heard of a phrase before called multitasking. And perhaps you've even done it, or you know people who seem to be the masters of it. And they just seem to be able to get everything done, and it seems like they do multiple things at the same time, and they seem to get so much work done. Well, the truth is, multitasking is actually a productivity myth, and your brain can only actually focus on one task at a time. And this is the reason you're told things like not to talk during a lecture, not to text while driving, and not to swim while skydiving. Okay, maybe that last one was a little bit out there, but I think you get my point. But the problem here is that multitasking actually divides your focus. So you can consider it like splitting it in half. And the problem with that is it makes it near impossible for you to do any one thing particularly well. And while we're on the topic of multitasking, fun fact time. Do you know where the term multitasking actually comes from? Well, it was a term that was coined in the 1960s by a group of computer scientists who were trying to find a way to logically explain how a computer seemingly does two things at the exact same time. But the truth is, even a computer must process code one piece at a time. It just simply does so quickly that it gives the appearance that it's multitasking and it's happening at the exact same time. Well, our brains operate much the same way. We can have multiple thoughts at virtually the same time, or it seems like they're at the same time, but the truth is they're just simply happening in rapid succession in our heads. And we're simply finishing our desired part of one thought and then jumping right into another. Well, this obviously created a problem, because between the 60s and the 80s, it became a popularized term, specifically in business, and seen as a desirable trait for professionals to have. But again, the truth is, every time you multitask, what you're doing is actually dividing your focus in half. So dividing it by, let's say, approximately 50% each time you multitask, or you do more than one task at a time. So if you think about that, In reality, if you were to try to do 4 things at the same time, you're only doing all 4 of them, or each of those 4, probably about 25% of the quality and proficiency that you could actually do it if you just focus on one of the 4 at a time and then progress to the next one. And several studies have been done, particularly in recent years, to debunk the myth of multitasking. And what they found is that even those who seem to be expert multitaskers did pretty poorly when it was determined on the basis of the quality of their work in comparison to the people who were just focusing strictly on one thing at a time. But now that you have a better understanding of what multitasking is and kind of where it came from and why we even talk about it, let's talk about some ways that you can single task a bit more effectively. Something else that's also covered in the book, The One Thing by Gary Keller, is the principle of blocking out time in your schedule for something called deep work. And doing so allows you to produce the absolute best quality that you can in the smallest amount of time. And it's actually recommended to block out 3 to 4 hours on your calendar specifically for doing deep work. And the concept of deep work means getting into the flow of your work and being able to see connections between information and formulate thoughts in such a way that it just seems to kind of come to you. And of note, it takes us approximately 25 minutes on average to actually get to the point where we're in that kind of flow state. But the thing most people don't realize is it only takes about 2.5 or 3 minutes for that focus to be broken, and that it would take you thereby, again, another 25 minutes or so to get back into the same train of thought and the same flow that you were previously in. And with that all said, let's just go into something that'll make a lot more sense when you see it, and we'll go through an example of my actual work calendar. So what you'll see here is that it shows me as being blocked off basically from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. for my One Thing event or my deep work. But you'll also notice that if you've ever used a calendar app before, such as Microsoft Outlook, what it will do is for any chat functions or any communication functions, it'll mark you or show you as busy or in a meeting to anyone looking to contact you. And this is what happens for me, which is great because it limits the amount of interruptions that occur during my deep work. And those who know me, or those who, I guess you can quote unquote, think twice about whether or not they really need something from me right now, will usually be the ones who call me during this time. But this is also a reminder to me to focus on my most important work during my peak productivity hours, which for me, over time, I've determined are from about 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., so that 4-hour block. And this obviously ensures that I get the best quality out of the effort I put into it for the energy I have in the morning. And when it comes to determining what your peak productivity time is, you should do something that's commonly referred to as a time audit. And you do this by tracking basically everything that you do every hour of every day for about 1 to 2 weeks, and then also noting for each of those hours how you feel during those hours and afterwards. And again, this will help you to determine where you seem to have the most or the best mental energy available in order for you to actually do the absolute best that you can on your deep work. And thereby that would help you determine your peak productivity window. But if we also take another look at my calendar again, something you'll notice here is that there are 3 gray, about 30-minute blocks that are specifically labeled email inbox review. And what those are for is just for me to be able to go through, respond to emails, and clear out my email for during those 30-minute blocks. And you'll also notice that the second half of my day after lunch is generally clear. You see a lot of white space. And I'll explain more about why these blocks exist later in this particular skill area, but also more so in the communication skill that we'll be talking about, I guess, a few videos from now. And so the next technique that we'll cover in terms of helping you better manage your time is something called the 2-minute rule. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes approximately 25 minutes for you to get on task and be just deeply focused and concentrating on what it is that you're doing, so that, again, you could do the absolute best work that you could possibly do during that time, but also retain and process information in the best way possible to efficiently get that work done. And also, as I mentioned, it only takes about 2.5 to 3 minutes for you to lose all of that focus. And this really comes down to a physiology thing. So it comes down to just how your brain works. And when you've been on task for about 25 plus minutes, that's the point where, in terms of doing deep work, you enter what's known as the flow state. And that's where things become much easier to do, if not completely effortless for you, and you start performing at your very best for that particular limited period of time. And if you can manage to keep disruptions to a minimum during this particular deep work period, i.e. keeping anything that disrupts you from the flow or the work you're doing at 2 minutes or less, it also makes it so that there's very little risk in actually derailing you and making it so that you would lose all that focus and momentum. And this is also why it's most efficient that you only complete a particular unscheduled task, such as a customer request email or a phone call, if it can be completed within 2 minutes or less. And handling these, what we will call little rocks, during these particular windows of time also prevents them from later on becoming big rocks that will definitely derail your focus. And more importantly, you have to learn over time how to be able to make the proper judgment of whether or not a little task or little rock can actually be completed in 2 minutes or less. You would either choose to complete the task immediately, if it could be done in obviously 2 minutes or less, or you would choose to delegate or defer it. And if you were to delegate the task, let's say that you give it to a coworker or you ask a friend at work to take care of it, just make sure that you create a follow-up task so that you can check on it later, just to make sure that there were no issues with getting it done. And if you're going to choose to defer the task, try to make sure that you add it to your task management system, which is something we'll talk about a bit in the next video, but we'll talk about more so in the third video on priorities or priority management. But make sure that you add it to your particular task management system, but then also communicate to the person who requested the work or asked you to do something, to let them know an approximate amount of time that you would probably get them an answer back. And I try to do this and add some sort of buffer, but this is probably the best way that you could do it. It's the best way that I have found to do it. But I would also ask if they happen to need a sooner response, because if I say that, hey Joe, I'm going to be able to get that task done for you by the end of the week, and it's Monday, and they need it by Wednesday, then what we don't want to do is we don't want to ruin a relationship or communicate poorly and end up having a strained relationship or a problem with this particular customer or coworker, client, whatever it may be, and make it where we give the impression or opinion that we don't want to hear feedback and we're just going to give them the work when we can get around to it. So this again opens the opportunity for better communication when you choose to communicate what you're planning to do, when you're planning to do it, and give them the opportunity to let you know if it should be a higher priority. So the next particular technique that we'll talk about is called the 1.5 rule. Now, I probably don't have to tell you this, but we as human beings are terrible judges of time. Whether that be how long it takes to do a particular task or how long it takes to get somewhere. We just don't particularly judge time well for things we've not actually done or don't have a lot of experience with. And part of the issue here is psychological. We tend to overestimate our ability to do things that we've never actually done before. But then on top of that, what compounds the problem is we also tend to underestimate the complexity of the task or how difficult it's going to be to complete, or just maybe how many steps it's going to require. But this is where the 1.5 rule comes into play. And it's simple. All you have to do is take the amount of time that you think a given task will take to complete and then multiply it by a factor of 1.5. So 1.5 times the amount of time you thought it would take. So if you were to think that a task might take you, let's say 30 minutes, then what you would do is, if you've never done that task before, but you think it'll take you 30 minutes to get done, then you would just allow yourself 45 minutes to actually complete that task, thereby being time and a half. And you do this because then once you near that around like 30-minute mark that you thought it was originally going to take to get done, you're going to have a pretty good idea whether or not you're even close to getting it finished. Or if you've run into other issues or complications that you weren't aware of would be a problem, and now you're probably going to need a bit more time to do it. And this is even more important when you think about the fact that you need to do things for other people. If you're going to tell somebody that you're going to have something done in, let's say, an hour, and about 45 to 50 minutes into the task, you realize, like, this is way harder than I thought it was going to be. You at least have told them already, because using the time and a half rule, you told them already that you were going to do it in about an hour and a half. And so at about an hour, you're able to communicate with them well ahead of schedule and let them know that you ran into some complications, and see if it's okay if you have a little bit of extra time beyond the hour and a half you scheduled with them to actually complete it. And the biggest thing here is that using a technique like the time and a half rule increases your professional flexibility, particularly with how you manage your time. But more so, as I was just saying, about being able to communicate sooner with the particular customer or client that you were going to give that work to or that product to, it also helps with managing expectations. Now, the next technique that I want to go over is one that I definitely use a lot, and it's called the buffer rule. So what this simply means, and it's very easy to explain, is you simply take however long it would take you to do something or get somewhere, let's say between meetings, and you ensure that you add a buffer or a padding of time in between two particular events. This happens commonly, especially in the professional world, particularly if you are at work and you have a lot of meetings, or you work in a professional work environment and you have a lot of meetings, because you'll often have times where it seems like meetings are back to back. Well, that offers you little time or room to breathe, or even room to move appropriately to get to where you need to go for your next meeting. So if you plan out meetings appropriately and they're only about 30 to 45 minutes, then by the time you get to the end of that block, and let's say that you have another meeting that starts at the top of the next hour, you at least have 15 minutes to gather your things, finish up notes, finish up a conversation for a holdover or an afterward conversation that happens with the last meeting, and then get to your next meeting on time. But you would also do this for anything else that you would do in terms of work, so such as projects or tasks that you perform, because you don't want to burn yourself out while you're trying to get all of your work done, particularly in the deep work period, because you don't want to just work for 4 straight hours. Trust me, that is not what I meant, and that will not help you. And if anything, it will just completely sap all of your mental energy for the entire day. And ultimately, what you're trying to do here is present the best possible image that you can of yourself as a professional. And being timely and prepared for the task at hand is definitely an effective and simple way to do that. That said, we also want to make sure that we don't allow too much buffer in terms of the time that it takes to actually complete a task, or the time allowed to get a task done. Because the other basically cognitive trap or psychological trap that we end up falling into, and this is something you probably have experience with, is what's known as Parkinson's Law. And that is simply the statement that a task will expand as such to fill the time available for its completion. So let's say a task takes you 1 hour to do. If you allow yourself 1 hour to complete that task, you'll probably get it done in an hour. But if you give yourself 4 hours to do that 1 hour task, it will most likely take you 4 hours to get it done. And this is due to simply our warped sense of time and urgency, because we each see and experience or sense time differently. And as such, it's probably a good idea, and it has been in my case or my experience, to put a definite start and end time or period on the particular task that you're performing, just to make sure that you get it done in a timely manner. And if you're not up against a deadline or something, I'm not saying that you should be so rigid in your time and like your time management or managing your schedule that you don't have the flexibility to adjust for things you learn, because that's not the point here. That's not the purpose of this particular rule or this technique. So what I mean is that you set a definite start and end time so that you can gauge your learning over time. Because when you're doing that task, it might be that you figure out if you give yourself an hour to do the task, you get towards the end of the hour and you still need more time. That's okay. You can take a break, adjust your schedule, make adjustments as appropriate for how much extra time you might need to actually perform that task, and then you can go on to complete it. But this also makes you a better judge of your time and managing your time over time. But that said, there's probably no better way to actually practice working with and setting time constraints than to practice the art of scheduling intentional work. And again, the one thing philosophy, or the philosophy that's touted in the book, specifically works or applies heavily to doing this, mainly because you need to be able to block out that 3 to 4 hours of your day for deep work so that you can do what's called intentional work. And remember that intentional work is essentially work that you have decided needs to be done or you are going to get done in that particular day. And kind of circling back real quick, as I talked about earlier in this video, one of the things that I do with my schedule is I leave the second half of my day completely open. Well, for the most part, open. Well, I do this deliberately because there's always going to be unexpected or unscheduled sources of work that are going to come into your day. And some examples for those of us who are office workers or work for companies is that you're going to have bosses who need your time, or you're going to have customers or clients that need your time, or you're going to have your coworkers that need your time. And they're all going to need it for various reasons. They're going to need it because they need mentoring from you. They're going to need it because they need help solving a problem, or they just need to talk to you to help strengthen your professional relationship with them. So you want to make sure that you have the time available to be able to do that. Because when you don't have that time and you don't accomplish everything that you need to get done for the day, as we were talking about doing during your deep work period. So again, using the example of my schedule. So from 8 to 12, I do my deep work. So by the time I get past lunchtime, I go and I have lunch, and then I come back from work or come back to work, then I am able to be available for my bosses, coworkers, or clients. And this seems to be something that I've experienced as being kind of an anomaly in the professional world, particularly the corporate working world. And the reason I say that is because each time that I would sit down with, let's say, a coworker or somebody who works for me, or somebody who reports to me, and I would give them my time, we would sit there, we would talk, and they maybe only plan to be there for like maybe 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And we're sitting there about 30, 40 minutes, and they're looking a little antsy, and they're kind of seem like they're a little bit concerned, but I'm paying full attention to them, giving them all my focus and effort in terms of the conversation or whatever it is that they need help with. And they'll always ask, I'd say probably about 95% of the time, they would ask at that point, is it really okay for us to continue having this conversation? Do you not have other things you need to do? And that's when I take that as kind of a mentorship opportunity or a coaching opportunity. And I explain how I managed to get my work done for pretty much the majority of the day, or all my most important work done earlier in the day so that I would have time for them. And then that's when people generally become curious on, well, how do you manage your schedule like that? What techniques and tips do you use? Which are the techniques and tips I'm sharing with you today. And that said, there's actually another reason why it's not recommended, or at least I do not recommend, that you block out more than 3 to 4 hours of productive work in an entire day. And the reason why is because you only have so much mental energy in a given day, and you don't want to burn yourself out. But it's also because it's been proven that people are only really truly productive, if you want to call it in terms productive, for about 3 hours or so a day. So something we will talk about coming up soon is talking about taking breaks. But before we get to that, what I wanted to kind of hit the home in terms of the point here is that you should try out different work schedules to see what works for you. Maybe try 3 hours, and then maybe try 4 hour schedule. and just see which one seems to work better for your overall energy and attention, and just see what seems to help you get the most done in the shortest amount of time possible. And again, the whole purpose of doing this for your deep work period is to make sure it's a specific period of time that you can be mostly uninterrupted. You can have most of your time and energy available to you to perform your absolute best work, but you could also be deliberately working on things that are going to move the needle, as it were, or help you get to where you're trying to go or reach the goal that you're trying to get to. And so something else that you'll notice as you do more of this deliberate planning is that certain themes start to emerge in your days. There's certain things that you just tend to group together where you tend to do more of on a given day. And this is something that is referred to as day theming. And so what I'll do now is I'll show you an example of mine. And what you'll see here is in my day theme example of my typical work schedule, that what I have here is my Monday through Friday schedule and each of the themes in parentheses underneath the day, along with the typical tasks that would fall under those themes or categories. Now, when I first began my journey to become a stronger, more effective professional, I didn't know anything about day theming or that it was even a thing. However, when I came across the particular chart that you see on the screen here, and I started looking at the tasks I'd been choosing to perform on different days of the week, I began to notice these specific themes. And day theming, again, it's intended to help you do your best work throughout the week by allowing you to focus only on those blocks of tasks that work best with your daily work routines or schedules and allow you to put your full effort into them. Another thing that this has come up as, I guess, being pretty popular lately, or in terms of a coined term or a way of explaining what it is that you're doing when you're doing day theming, is task or work batching. And that's basically what you see here on the screen, is that these are all the batches or buckets, I guess, if you want to call them that, for each day of the types of work that I get done in a given day. And on that note, I think Fridays are often pretty much everybody's, in terms of working professionals, that particular day of the week that they're just kind of wrapping up tasks, or it's a wrap-up day. And so as you noticed on my particular day theming, that Friday is labeled as a creating day. And I do that because it's effectively, I guess you could think of it like a 4-day work week, where the 5th day is more for creation, figuring out better ways, like process improvements, better ways of doing things, testing out new skills, learning new things, and just strengthening my skill set as a professional, which is why I do it this particular way. And coincidentally, that's actually how I came up with the concept of the 6 pillars or the professional management skills when I originally created this program that we're going through now for this series. So now that we've talked about some techniques and stuff you can use to better manage your time, plan out your schedule and such, let's kind of touch on about how long is, I guess you would call, reasonable to plan out in advance for your schedule. So me personally, I plan out about 2 weeks in advance, and I know there's a lot of other professionals that do something similar. But what I'll basically do is either on the Friday, as you've seen in my actual work schedule or my day theming schedule, I would do it either on that day, perhaps in the afternoon, or I would do it for about 20 to 30 minutes, and on average for me, on a Sunday afternoon, just to kind of take a look at what I have planned for the next 2 weeks and see if I need to make any adjustments based on anything that's arisen in my schedule. Now, it used to take me about an hour or so on every Sunday afternoon, where I would go into my task management system, which in this case is called Asana. It's A-S-A-N-A. And I would look at my tasks that I have planned for the next week. Am I overloaded on a particular day? Do I need to be lighter on a particular day now because I have personal family appointments that I need to attend to? Then I would make adjustments as appropriate for that week. And then the second week, it would be kind of the same thing. I would be looking at, do I need to make adjustments for that? Do I now have an appointment that I did not originally have scheduled for a day I planned to get a bunch of deep work done? and now I have an appointment that morning, and it's about a week and a half from now, then I'll make adjustments to my schedule and move things around and kind of balance out the task load, which is something in terms of a concept of work balance or load balance that we'll get more into in the next video, where we talk about the second professional management skill of task management. But in this particular case, I would do this more or less as a hard and soft rule. So the next week, so if it's Sunday afternoon, I'm planning my schedule out. The next week, I'm going to plan out to be as hard as possible or as concrete as possible for my schedule of what I intend to do and approximately when in a given day I plan to do each of the tasks I have set up. And the reason I do that is because I don't want a lot of flexibility in terms of what I've deliberately planned to do, because I don't want to end up having to adjust things last minute or feeling like, I really should maybe do something else and with this time, so I'm just going to adjust this particular thing, and then it ends up piling into the next day. So what's the quote? It's like, tomorrow is the busiest day of the week. So that's also something that I found to be true. If I continually procrastinate and put things off simply because I don't want to perform the task, then that tends to create problems with my schedule. Now, the second schedule, or the second week in my schedule that I plan out for each week, is intended to be more soft or somewhat fluid and flexible. And the reason why is because I'll put down specifically what task I think I would do in a given day. So following my day theming again, put down Monday through Friday what tasks I want to get done each day. But I understand that they may be adjusted the following weekend when I'm planning the hard set for that particular week. But now, when you're thinking about doing this and you try to do it on your own, and you're planning 2 weeks out in advance, or you just plan out 1 week in advance, and that's perfectly fine, especially when you're starting, try not to overwhelm yourself with the task of organizing your tasks or organizing your schedule to the point that it makes you feel frustrated or makes you feel like you just want to stop and you don't want to do it at all, because that will defeat the whole purpose of all of this. But when you're thinking about deliberately planning for your schedules, consider all things that impact your daily schedule. That could be work, that could be personal family events, or personal, like vacation time. I plan for vacation time. So if you were to look at my task management system and see that if I have like summer vacation coming up and I'm going to be gone for, let's say, a week from work, then that whole week in my task management system is blank. And the reason it's blank is because I don't want to have to be worrying about work whenever I'm on vacation or I'm on my time off. Now, in terms of like what to do with that, we'll talk about that more some later in terms of how to balance the task or what to do. What do you do? Just not have work for an entire week? Well, no, but I adjust my schedule appropriately to compensate so that I have that week free, if that makes sense. And the goal here, again, is really flexibility. That's what you're trying to get with your time management skills and strengthening them. You're trying to get more flexibility so that you can be able to absorb additional work. If it's either work you have to do, it's higher priority work, or it's work you want to do, and now you need to shift things around in terms of priorities and the work you were planning to do. You want to be more flexible and have the time to do so. Now, that's not to say that in my schedule that every single week will look the same, or that every single day will look the same when it comes to my deep work schedule. But I try to stick to this as much as possible because it creates predictability, and the brain likes that. It likes to be able to predict the environment or predict what is going to occur because it allows it to feel more safe. But when it comes to the aspect of like, well, do you always leave your second half of your day open? Well, no. Sometimes I schedule appointments during that time, or for me or my family or for work or meetings with my bosses and such, or maybe I want to take a particular training class. I want to sharpen my skills on a particular skill, or I want to learn something else about something related to my job. Then I might use that time to be able to do that. Or I have this extra time now, and you know what? I still have a lot of energy today, and I think I would like to get ahead of schedule because I am planning to take a vacation, let's say 2 weeks. Then I think I would like to get caught up on my schedule. So let me take a look at what I've got to do and see if I've got some smaller rocks, things that aren't super task or focus intensive, that I could just kind of knock out in maybe, let's say, an extra hour today. And then I would adjust as appropriate for my task management system to align with the flexibility of my scheduling system. So the next thing that I want to talk about is something I touched on just briefly when I was talking about my schedule and how I do things and planning for vacation time and such. And that's the concept of incorporating breaks into your schedule. Ideally, when you do this, you're not making it something that you think, this is a schedule I should have, or this is a schedule that my boss will expect me to have, or this is a schedule that so-and-so says is the best schedule that you should have, and this is how you should structure your day, and that's how all of it should work. Because not everybody's the same. So what works for me may not necessarily work exactly that way for you. But these tips and these techniques are not intended to be prescriptive. They're intended to be a guidance of sorts. So it helps give you a framework on which to make or which to base decisions when you're thinking about how you're spending your time. But it's very important that you take breaks, because ideally what you're doing with your schedule is you're giving yourself a schedule that you would give somebody that you truly love or that you really care deeply about, because you wouldn't give somebody else a schedule that makes things harder for them or makes it more rigid or creates less flexibility or makes them frustrated because you care about that person. Well, in the same psychological concept of taking care of yourself or self-care, that's what time management really is. It's almost like a self-care skill, because ideally you want to give yourself, again, the schedule you would give somebody that you care about, because one of the people you should care about most is definitely yourself. That said, when we're talking about the actual breaks and we're talking about what I mean by taking breaks, I'm talking about taking periodic breaks between bouts of work or focused times or focused sets of work. And you need to do this for a couple of reasons. You need to do it first because of physical needs. You can only physically sit in one place for a certain amount of time. You need to get up, you need to walk around, your body needs to stretch, it needs to walk around, go to the restroom, get water, get food, snack, whatever. You need physical breaks. But it also is important because you need mental breaks. You need to be able to take a break on your focus on a task so you can recover and recharge some of the energy that you've expended mentally, so that you can then go back into the work for your next round of work or your next round of focus or your flow. And then you can go back into it and actually put forth your full effort for the next, let's say, 45 minutes or so. And that's something that we'll be touching on here shortly, but is concepts or ideas of example work schedules. But again, you need time to process information, and that's also another reason that you take breaks. So if you work for 45 minutes on a task or your flow or your deep work, so the first 45 minutes you work on it, then you might spend 15 minutes on a break. Well, that allows your brain to also take a break and process the information you've given it and think about connections of new ideas or new information or other ways of thinking about things and solving a problem that's going to maybe be related to the next task that you're going to do. And you also, it's good in terms of combining the physical and mental aspects of taking breaks, because one of the physical breaks that is often touted as being super great or highly effective for creative work or any type of work where you're typed to do problem solving is taking a walk. So go out, take a walk, let your brain take a rest, and let things just kind of simmer and process. Because then ideally, through taking the breaks, you recover more your energy, more your physical and mental energy, but you also get more clarity on the next part of the work that you're going to be doing. Now, something I will touch on is a psychological construct, or a psychological concept rather, and it has to do with how the brain works. So you're probably familiar with what's known as circadian rhythm, or you may have heard about it. And it's just your body's natural sleep-wake cycle. So you stay up all day, sunlight helps with it, and then you get sleepy at night, you go to sleep, you effectively recharge overnight your sleep, and you wake up and you're refreshed, and then now you can go back and you can do work with similar levels that you did at the previous day. Well, there's also a concept similarly related to how the brain functions in terms of work cycles, and it's called the ultradian rhythm. So the ultradian rhythm simply means that there's a certain finite amount of time that your brain can focus on a given piece of work or can focus on work period before it needs rest. And if you think about it, it's a lot like going out and taking a run, right? So you're jogging and you start to get tired, just take a rest for a little bit. Or you're working out like weightlifting. You take a pause, about 2-3 minute pause between sets. You do that because it helps to recover some of your energy that you've expended so that you can put forth as much energy as possible of what you have left into the next activity or the exercise or the next sprint or mile or whatever it is. In the case of the brain, this gives you an opportunity to put forth the best amount of remaining energy into the next task. So with ultradian rhythm, ideally you wouldn't want to work at more than about 90 minutes at a given time, meaning this is 90 minutes straight. And the reason why is because at about 90 minutes, you'll start to notice what's probably, I guess it's more commonly referred to as cognitive decline. And it's when the brain starts to slow down in that amount or the effectiveness of its processing, and you start to notice that you're having trouble focusing. So you start to notice that you're not remembering the things you're reading, or you're not being able to stay on task. Like you keep forgetting key details, and now I have to go back and look through notes because I was just focused on this thing and I was doing it. I lost my train of thought is a common phrase when this happens. But at about 120 minutes seems to be about the peak or the cap of your ultradian rhythm in terms of your brain's work-rest cycle or focus-rest cycle. And at that point, you're basically just at zero. You're tapped out. Very little will get done. At that point, you will process very little at that point, and you will probably remember virtually nothing after that point, or at least nothing that would be useful. So with that said, it's optimal to work in different schedules or work-rest cycles, similar to how you would do with a physical labor or physical type of work, but doing so with your brain. So now I'll go ahead and I'll touch on a couple of the ones that I have personally used, or a few of the ones I've personally used that were exceptionally helpful for me, especially starting out. And I'll kind of give an explanation of how to make the judgment or the decision on which one to use based on where you might be at in terms of your time management skills. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is something that probably many of you heard about, or if you've been in the productivity space, or if you've watched other people's YouTube videos like Ali Abdaal or Thomas Frank or somebody else who does productivity advice, is what's referred to as the Pomodoro technique. And the Pomodoro technique is simply a matter of breaking down a work cycle into two parts, a work and a rest cycle. And the first work cycle is about 25 minutes, followed by about a 5-minute rest cycle. You do that for one round, and then you would do about 3 to 4 rounds before you would take a longer break. And in which you take a longer break after about, let's say, 4 rounds of doing 25 minutes of focused work and 5 minutes of break, then you would take a much longer break. So maybe about 15 minutes of break or 30 minutes of break, depending on how long you think you need to take a break for. So some of the tasks and such that this is best suited for, I would say in terms of a experience level with time management, this is probably better suited to those who don't have a lot of experience with time management, or they have been working for a really long time, years, decades, whatever, in their chosen profession, and they're trying to change the way they work. Like they're trying to adopt new habits, like which is what I did. After working 18 years in the military, I ended up figuring out that I didn't fully understand how I should be working, and I needed to change my habits. So I didn't just go in and like, all right, I'm going to work for 90 minutes straight, and I'm going to do that 3 or 4 times every morning, or 60 minutes straight, 3 or 4 times every morning. I didn't just do that because, like any other habit, it takes time to develop. And the brain is a muscle like every other muscle in your body, so it takes time to strengthen. So that's something, again, to just consider when you're picking your particular work schedule. And again, so the Pomodoro technique is well suited for like general work tasks or study tasks where it's hard to focus, so you don't want to spend a lot of time doing it, and you need to take breaks periodically and it helps to take more frequent breaks so you have a time to recharge or recover your focus and then get back into doing it. And another thing that this would probably be well suited for is anything that's a new experience task, because a favored way of figuring out how long something takes in terms of a new process is to use the Pomodoro technique and then check off basically on a list, like a checklist, how many Pomodoros it takes to complete said task. And since you know every Pomodoro is about 25 minutes of focused work, and that means you should be able to figure out a rough estimate of how long a task truly takes to do. So again, this is another thing that's good for this, but it's also good for studying. And as for the second example work schedule that I would recommend, it would definitely be the 45-15 work schedule, which is actually one that is my personal favorite, and I keep going back to it over and over again. And it's simply kind of like the breakup of the Pomodoro, right? You're breaking up a time of 25 and 5, work and then rest. Well, in this case, it's 45 minutes of work followed by 15 minutes of rest. And you would do that for about 3 cycles, or that would be considered one round. You would do it for about 3 cycles or so, and then you would take a much longer break. So if you normally take 15 minutes for a break, in this case, you would take 30 minutes. I tend to line this one up in particular because, again, it is a favorite of mine. I tend to line this one up with my break for lunch. So if I start work, let's say at 7:30, 8 o'clock, then by the time I'm finished, it's going to be about 11:30 or so probably before I would be taking a break for lunch. And at that point, then I've accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish for the day. I've gotten all my big rocks done or my deep work done for the day, and I can go to lunch and I can ideally enjoy the rest of my day. So that is that particular schedule. And for the third particular work schedule or example schedule, this one's one that I saw come up probably in the last couple of years as being more popular, because it seems to be the peak productivity of any work schedule. It's referred to as the 52-17 schedule. It's based on newer research, and this was one that I used for a while when I needed to get a lot done in a short amount of time, meaning that I was under a time crunch or a schedule for a project or something that had to be done, and I just didn't have a lot of time available to do it. So you would again work for 52 minutes and then take a break for 17. This isn't as easy to work around in terms of mentally, because you do have to account for the difference, because it's always going to be different, because 52 minutes of work by 17 minutes doesn't equal a 60-minute work cycle or a complete 60-minute 1-hour cycle. So I do recommend apps for this. If you're going to be doing it, there are time tracking apps that help with this. If you're interested in knowing like some recommendations for that, definitely drop me a comment below the video and just let me know if you'd be interested in some of the time management apps that I use, so that way I guess that would give you some ideas of how to use those. And then this is best suited, it's definitely suited well for deep work because you get a lot more done in that time frame. I would, in this case, using this, leave a little bit later than I would normally leave for lunch, but I would definitely get a ton more done in that time with the extra about 5 to 7 minutes of work time that I would have every hour. But that's currently considered, as I said, to be probably about the highest efficiency that we would be in regards to being like human beings or being human efficient. And that's simply because, again, going back to the concept of a circadian rhythm, where that's going to allow you to get the most out of your time without burning yourself out. Okay, so we've covered a lot today regarding a deep dive into the time management skill or the time management pillar. And I just want to touch on kind of a personal note. When I started figuring out all the things that I've been talking to you about today in this particular video, I didn't know how to do any of this. I hated going to work. I did not like my job. And the reason why is because I just felt frustrated every day. When I got to work, I felt like I just have more stuff to do, or I didn't even get the stuff that I needed or wanted to do done yesterday, and now I have to do it on top of all this stuff today. And that's something, again, I'm going to be touching on more in coming pillars about the other skills that I discovered and I have helped to put together kind of toolkits or tips and techniques for that ultimately help shape the professional I am today. Because the person I was then and the person I am now are like night and day in terms of a professional. And it was this particular piece, this particular skill or pillar, that when I discovered these things and I started implementing them, it was like a light bulb went on in my head. And all of a sudden, like, it was much brighter and it was easier to see. Everything was clearer. I could focus and I could actually enjoy doing my work. And that's where I'm at now. I'm finally to the point, after many years of working in the military, that I have figured out what was the, I guess, unsolvable puzzle as it seemed when I was going through it. I've figured out how to solve it. And these are the tips and techniques that I'm hoping will help you find the pieces of your own puzzle that you can put in place so that you also have a clearer picture. That all said, I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll stay tuned and keep an eye out for the next video next week, where we'll start doing a deep dive into the task management skill or pillar. But again, as always, before you go, if you would be so kind, leave us a comment below and tell us one thing that you learned from this particular video that's something about time management that you didn't already know. And while you're there, be sure to share any tips or advice that you might have, or maybe even techniques you've tried and you've discovered, so that it might help other people, myself included, with your experience in terms of time management and some of the ways you found to effectively handle it and to bolster up your pillar. And on the note of sharing and being open to the experiences of others, I just want to say that I hope that you will always continue to be learning and exploring. I believe in being a lifelong learner. There's always something else for us to learn, no matter what age you might be at. And there's always something else to learn, no matter how much older or younger a person might be than you who happens to be advising you on something. And the reason why is because we all have different life experiences, but all of our experiences are valid and valuable. So again, this goes back to the concept of sharing your unique gift with the world. And that's what I'm hoping to continue to help you unlock and unleash in our coming videos. That said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I wish you all the very best as you continue your personal and professional journeys, and we'll see you next week. But until then, take care.